you will be introduced to one of the most important historical events in the world, the Vietnam War. My colleagues are experts and recognized historians worldwide. They will explain you detail by detail all the consequences about this war and also the things for and against the Vietnam War. Let's not forget about our small but beautiful country, Honduras, and the relationship that it had with the Vietnam War. And remember that you will be able to learn in this wonderful documentary the presidents that Honduras had in those decades and the most important historical events too.
The Vietnam War was a helicopter war.
Weapons and men from North Vietnam began infiltrated to the South Vietnam.
Terrifying. I mean, America might not be the guys on the white horses with the white hats.
It was one of the wars that the United States lost in all its existence.
Riders on the storm.
Number of USA military advisors in South Vietnam rises to 12,000. The origin of the Vietnam War. Vietnam War is the commonly used name to the Second Indochina War from 1954 to 1975. Vietnam was part of Indochina, a French colony in Southeast Asia, established in 1887. Vietnam fought for its independence and won in 1954. The war was fought between North Vietnamese and South Vietnamese. North Vietnamese was communist and South Vietnamese wasn't. Ho Mi Chinh, who was a leader of North Vietnamese, wanted to spread communism and make it a communist country in a whole. The main reason of the United States got involved in the Vietnam War was the purpose of doing everything possible to keep communism spreading around the world. Since the beginning of the Cold War, the United States had practiced a policy of containment against the expansion of the communism, and they wanted to prevent the ideology from taking root in different regions in the world.
Important places were used at the Vietnam War. The first place is Cu Chi Tunnel. That place was used to hide a lot of people. And another place is My Lai Memorial. That place were used to massacre many people. And another place is Kisang. In that place, many people were died and killed at the Vietnam War.
The main countries involved in the Vietnam Wars were South and North Vietnam. In total, there were at least 21 countries reported to get involved in the Vietnam War. South Vietnam was backed by anti-communist countries, United States, Thailand, Australia, Philippines, Spain, Japan, Canada, even Costa Rica and Honduras, among other countries. On the other side, North Vietnam was backed by anti-communist allies, which include China, Soviet Union, Cuba, North Korea, Sweden, East Germany, Poland, and Czechoslovakia.
The Vietnam War was a helicopter war. Almost 12,000 of helicopters flew during the conflict, but exist many types of helicopters, but only one of them is considered as an iconic model, and it is the UH-1 Hercules, but is also known as the Y. Exist many types of helicopters that were used and commanded in the Vietnam War, and they were the UH-1 Hercules, also known as the Y. It was the most famous helicopter. The utility was transport and gunship. The AH-1G Y Cobra. It was a two-set attack helicopter. The OH-13 Sioux. It was an observation and light helicopter. The OH-58A Kiowa. It was an observation transport helicopter. The CH-47 Chinook helicopter was a transport and cargo helicopter. The CH-53 C. Ceylon. It was a helicopter for transport heavy lift firearms. The Vietnam War saw the deployment of two of the most famous and most produced rifles of all time, the AK-47 and the M16. And also the most destructive bombs were the booby traps and cluster bombs. And the most impactant chemical weapons were the Agent Orange and the napalm. Dwight Eisenhower from 1953 through 1961. The President Eisenhower decided to support anti-communist leader Go Diem in consolidating power in the South. John F. Kennedy from 1961 through 1963. Lyndon B. Johnson from 1964 through 1969. He continued supporting South Vietnam to fight against the Viet Cong. Richard Nixon from 1969 through 1974. When Richard Nixon became president, he decided to end the U.S. involvement in the war. He first began removing troops from Vietnam in July of 1969. Gerald Ford. He was the president that declared the end of the Vietnam War.
Vietnam War. Vietnam War has a lot of consequences, but I will mention just 4 of them. So one of them is immigration of Vietnamese. Many Vietnamese began to emigrate to many parts of the United States, and many people took the decision to leave their country. Also, they lost infrastructure. More than 3,000 hospitals, universities, and schools lost in this war. Another serious consequence was the big environment impact, because the United States used herbicide and that ended up with many parts of the jungle, especially with Cambodia area. Another big consequence was the high number of deaths. But the question here is, how many people died in this war? Well, it's estimated about 1 million soldiers died in this war. Also, around 2 or 6 civilians died too in this war.
On March 29, 1973, United States ends its military involvement in Vietnam. Although the war will continue another 2 years, South Vietnamese will no longer receive Americans' assistance. But what were the causes of this ending? Protests define a generation. Less than 30% of Americans agree with the Vietnam War. Protests were a common sight in Washington, D.C., as well as on campus college around the country. American is fed up with the war. Around 1,700,000 males were drafted to serve. 25% of total forces in Vietnam were drafted. Nixon starts to give into the pressure. President Richard Nixon wants to continue to support South Vietnamese war efforts. However, with an anti-war sentiment growing in the United States and sustained casualties in Vietnam, Nixon felt pressure to bring an end to the war and start to plan an exit with the National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger and Major General Alexander Haig. Prisoners of war released. Future U.S. Senator John McCain was released on March 14 after 5.5 years of captivity. Almost 600 POWs were released. Many of the POWs were pilots who were shot down over the North Vietnamese and Laos. So finally Nixon announces ceasefire on national television and plans to end U.S. offensive action in Vietnam.
Paris Peace Accord. This accord, officially titled the Agreement of Ending War in Vietnam and Restoring the Peace in Vietnam, was a peace treaty signed on January 27, 1973 to establish the peace in Vietnam and end the Vietnam War.
So, on the other hand, during the Vietnam War, Honduras was passing through many political issues. Government of the Military Assembly from 1956 to 1957. Julio Lozano Diaz was overthrown on October 21, 1956. The Military Assembly was integrated by General Roque Rodriguez, Colonel Héctor Caraccioli, and Major Roberto Galvez Barnes, initializing the participation of the Honduras Army in political affairs in the country.
Contributions to education. Primary education was supported by the municipalities and subsidized by the state. This situation avoids the expansion of elementary schools. The salary was very low, so teachers went to work in other areas instead of teaching. A law was therefore issued, Decree number 173, on October 17, 1957, by which the state assumed that responsibility of financing primary education, creating a base salary with an increase per year of service. The military government also cared about the National Autonomous University of Honduras, creating the Decree number 170 on October 15, 1957. The board approved the organic law. Also, the military board created the INVA, National Housing Institute. Another contribution was the creation of the PANI, National Board of Children. Likewise, the General Comptroller of the Republic was created, which replaced the former Superior Accounts Court. And the system of proportional representation for the elections of deputies in the National Constituent Assembly.
The second important event that happened during this time in Honduras was the government of Oswaldo López Arellano. From 1963 to 1965, Oswaldo López Arellano was a military and businessman. He was the head of the government on October 3, 1963, giving a cap of the constitutional president Ramón Villeda Morales. One of the most important things that happened during this government, during Oswaldo's government, was the creation of boards and institutions. There are the culmination of El Hospital Escuela, the creation of the second stage of Yohoa River Hydroelectric Project, the foundation of El Banco de los Trabajadores, and the creation of some health centers, subcenters, and buildings for public offices and school classrooms. The second important relevant event that happened during Oswaldo's government was the war between Honduras and El Salvador. It was called Honduran and Salvadoran War. Around 1969, between 25,000 and 300,000 Salvadorans lived here in Honduras, most of them illegally. They wanted our lands to cultivate it. The Oswaldo's government didn't like that, and he initiated a massive deportation of Salvadorans. In July 14, the National Guard of El Salvador attacked Honduras and started bombing the strategic line of Tegucigalpa, Juticalpa, Choluteca, Santa Rosa de Capan, and Catacamas. The Oswaldo's government denounced that aggression to the American states, and everything culminated in a treaty of peace between the two nations, between Honduras and El Salvador, in Lima in 1980.
The work of López Arellano as a president of the Republic was dynamic, and the harmony that had been damaged was restored. At the time of the war with El Salvador, it can be said that the president has the support of the population. The second government of López Arellano in 1972, López Arellano returned to give a coup d'etat to Dr. Ramón Ernesto Cruz. In this second period, the regime assumed a reformist line. At that time, the government of Arellano begins to become aware of what is happening in the country. Honduras had high level of social inequality, illiteracy, malnutrition, and problems with exports and imports. With all these problems at the time, the government set up to achieve the objectives of the National Development Plan. Objectives like decreased levels of employment improve the means of production, and modernize the national industry. The Banana Strike. On May in 1954, the banana workers went on a strike that would involve almost all workers in Honduras. The Banana Strike was a labor movement that lasted 69 days, a period in which improvements in working conditions were demanded. The banana monopolies, the United Fruit Company and the Standard Fruit Companies, were the ones who controlled the economy in Honduras. They put and removed presidents whenever they want, and they also dominated the National Congress. On February of 1975, the president of United Brands, Eli Black, committed suicide by throwing himself from the Pan American Building in New York City. The cause of his death was the discovery by the American authorities of having paid a high official of the government of Honduras to eliminate the taxes that the government had established for every box of banana. Another historical event was occurring in that time. The Hurricane Fifi was a catastrophic tropical cyclone that killed almost 10,000 people in Honduras. It was the fourth deadliest Atlantic hurricane on record. It affected Honduras, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Mexico, and Jamaica.